Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our EUDR summer school. It's our first episode of the series. I see people trickling in. Before everyone gets in here, I just want to give a quick introduction of the team here today. Those that have attended some of our previous webinars will know us. But just to give you a quick rundown, I'm Jasper. I'm one of the sustainability researchers at Coolset, and I'm joined today by Elisavet, who is also part of the research team. And together, we've been spending the last couple of months really doing a deep dive into EUDR, trying to understand everything so that we can also communicate that with our customers today, but also going forward. And also, of course, so that we can package it within our software environment. The idea is to get that knowledge before we put that in the software, and that's also what we're trying to share with you today. I'm expecting quite some questions. Please feel free to add those in the question section on the bottom right of your screen, and we'll try to get to them all by the end of the webinar. The experience has showed that not always there's not always enough time to answer all of the questions, but be assured that we'll get back to you over email if we can't get back to you live today. So feel free to answer to put your questions in the bottom right. I think we can get started with today's session. And what we're going to quickly start with is the EUDR Summer School series. So today's the first session where we can really talk about what kind of data to collect. To then in 2 weeks, we'll have the session on the 30th of July where we talk about the risk assessment under EUDR. And then 2 weeks after that, so in a month, we'll talk about submitting your due diligence statement. So any and all questions about the risk assessment and the due diligence statement, know that we'll get to those in the next couple of weeks. But of course, if you have any questions that are related to today's topic or beyond, feel free to put those in the question box and we'll be sure to get back to you on that. So a quick update on the plan for today. So as we're not only focusing on kind of the regulations, but also the politics surrounding it, we're going to give you a quick Brussels update. Then we're going to discuss the data points for EUDR compliance, talk about organizing the collection process, and then try to make it as practical as possible with the case study. And then, of course, we'll have some time at the end for the Q&A, so be sure to stick around for that. I want to quickly start with the update from last week. Some of you may have seen it. The EU country risk benchmarking was rejected. To give a quick summary, the EU risk benchmarking list was basically a list containing all of the countries in the world and basically listed them by kind of a system of high, medium, and low risk. And basically what that means is that some countries were then exempted from certain risk assessment elements, and some were required to do more risk assessments before exporting their products. The European Parliament last week rejected that list, which was proposed by the European Commission. And the original list is from May. And the interesting there, which is also why a lot of the members of the European Parliament were against the current list, is because there are only 4 countries which are tagged as high risk, which are Myanmar, North Korea, Russia, and Belarus. Whereas all EU member states were low risk, and then many others were standard risk. So it was a bit of an arbitrary system, and to make matters more confusing, there wasn't any clear transparency or methodology disclosed. So and it was anyone's best guess to determine how this was calculated, also raising questions about kind of the position of the European Union in determining how countries may trade in the future. The EPP, the European People's Party, is reviving calls to introduce a no-risk classification, which is a move also criticized by the World Trade Organization. So really quickly to give you a brief overview of the possible scenarios we see coming out of this, the most likely one is a revised benchmarking same framework scenario, where the European Commission improves the data sources, the thresholds, and transparency, as well as disclosing the methodology. So that would already help answer a lot of the questions about why certain countries are in certain risk levels. Furthermore, it allows for regional differentiation within large countries, as this addresses fairness concerns. For example, a large country like Brazil will have different levels of kind of regional differentiations based on where you source from. Then the third point is that core EUDR obligations remain unchanged as businesses adjust sourcing regions but stay the course. The second scenario is that the no-risk category is introduced, which is basically the category that the EPP, the European People's Party, wants to have introduced. Good to know is that this is not part of the vote from last week. So this is really something separate and would have to basically be revisited in the European Commission and the Parliament. So this is something that's not part of the discussion today. But of course, as we've seen with previously the omnibus and kind of just the political turbulence in Brussels, nothing is off the table when it comes to these discussions anymore. So this would basically mean a fourth tier which exempts no risk production countries from due diligence like traceability and risk assessments. It also creates loopholes for deforestation laundering and raises World Trade Organization non-compliance risks. Just so you know, the World Trade Organization has kind of a binding mandate, so countries do have to oblige by kind of the official trade rules, and this creates some issues there from a legal perspective. It also undermines the EUDR's purpose and faces strong opposition from NGOs and legal experts. But that's not new, I think, considering those that have paid attention to the omnibus proposal, which has also seen kind of a lot of dubious claims being made. And then on to the third and last scenario, which we also see as the least likely one, is that the EPP uses the political momentum of the omnibus proposal and expands the scope beyond benchmarking to weaken the law itself. This could delay implementation, dilute definitions, and fragment enforcement. It also introduces major business uncertainty and risks losing credibility in EU regulation. Once again, this is the least likely scenario, but we want to be transparent with you about kind of what we're seeing in the market and also what we're seeing going forward. But I think the most likely scenario for now is that it goes forward with a better methodology, seeing as that what was being voted on in the European Parliament. We're also speaking to politicians in Brussels who will be able to tell us more. So stay tuned on our LinkedIn for more updates on that in the next couple of days. So a quick poll to get us started. I'm really curious about this one. What do you think should happen next with the EUDR country risk classification system? First option, we are preparing for all scenarios with or without country risk levels. We support the 3-tier classification, but endorse reclassifying the countries. And we want a clear no risk category to be added. So we know that not everyone here is a reporting company necessarily, but I think this question goes beyond that and also is relevant for perhaps consultants and also just people interested in the EUDR for several reasons. So let's have a look at what kind of answers are coming in. So we see that 53% actually are saying we're preparing for all scenarios with or without country level risks. That's also what we're seeing from our customers and generally in the market when we're looking around. People and companies are starting to prepare now and starting to take it serious as the deadline is, of course, the 1st of January 2026. That's less than half a year away. Okay, interesting. Moving on, we're going to have a look at the data points for EUDR compliance, as I think this will help everyone get a better understanding of where we stand today. So why is data collection required? I think this is a really important question to answer before we actually dive into what data points to collect. The first one being, and the most important being that the EUDR requires traceability to origin. So within the framework, whenever you import or buy or are part of the supply chain of an EUDR related product, such as timber or palm oil, you need to be able to say where it comes from. So that basically means that this traceability enables the EU and companies to verify that no deforestation or illegalities occurred after the 31st of December 2020, which is basically the cutoff point. Everything that was purchased or created after that cutoff point needs to be analyzed under the regulation of the EUDR when it enters the market in the European Union. Also, data collection is mandatory here. So the next point here, why is data collection required from an EUDR perspective? So those that have had a look already at the EUDR knows that it consists of a lot of articles, some of which are more interesting for today's session. So we're going to focus mainly on Article 9 and Article 10, knowing that also Article 10 will be the main subject of the next webinar, but also has kind of some influence on what we're talking about today. So quickly, Article 9 is about information requirements and outlines the minimum data that every operator must collect to prove their products are traceable, legal, and deforestation free. Those are kind of the key words here, and it's easier said than done. So to prove that something is traceable, legal, and deforestation free is really the core of this whole this whole kind of effort. But it takes a lot of effort to make sure that that's the case, or to prove that that's the case. Article 10 is about the risk assessment, and this requires operators to conduct a risk assessment based on the information gathered and more, but you can't assess what you haven't documented, which then brings us back to why data collection is important. So let's discuss the next poll. I'm also curious about your insights here. How far are you in your data collection process? 3 options here. We have a data collection process and are gathering the info currently. We've started on some data, but not on everything yet. We haven't begun or aren't sure what we need for EUDR. Really curious about your insights here. Seeing that around 46% have said we haven't begun or aren't sure what we need for EUDR. I think that kind of resonates with what we're seeing as well. So a lot of companies are starting the process, but EUDR, as with similar big sustainability regulations, and in this case the deforestation regulation, it is very big and complex at first, and then you start getting it. So hopefully also the summer school that we're now beginning is a good starting point for everyone attending. But yeah, good to see that also that being reflected. So let's have a look at what data to collect, how and who, and let's start with the basic shipment info, which is I think the most kind of the most basic part of what you need to understand, but also of course without the basics you can't move forward. So what to collect? So first of all, you need to collect the product description, which includes the trade name, the product type, as well as the common/scientific name of the species if it's wood, and then you also need a description of the products, including the raw materials. Then you also need the quantity, of course, which can either be in kilograms of net mass or the volume or the number of items, depending on what kind of commodity you're importing or working with. You also need to look at the supplier information, which includes the name, the address, and the email of that supplier. And then you also need the buyer information, which also then includes that same information. Good to note here is that for the due diligence statement, which is kind of the end result of this whole process of the EUDR, which you then kind of attach to the product that you're working with within your section of the market, will also include these elements. So you're not doing double work, you're working basically towards that due diligence statement. How do you get it? So you need to have info available in existing documentation, which is where you can find it. You also have the ERP systems, which are partially also for supply chain overviews. There you can also get this data oftentimes. And you also have commercial invoices and packing lists, contracts, purchase orders, and logistics records where this information can be found. But of course, as the market prepares for the EUDR, this information isn't always there per default. So this is going to also require you to speak to your supply chain vendors and to see, what kind of information is still missing from the current contracts and kind of collaborations agreements that you have. Then who is responsible? So internally, of course, this will be procurement and operations, but perhaps also the sustainability team will get involved, but then also your supplier who might need to verify the species name. So then let's have a look at the area of harvest info. And I think this is where it gets really interesting from a more technical perspective. So one thing is collecting the data of like the shipping information, but the EUDR mainly looks at what kind of products are you importing and where are you getting them from. And this is where you start verifying whether it's actually deforestation free, because of course, everything that you work with under EUDR is related ultimately to verifying whether it's deforestation free. So then it only makes sense that you're looking at the plots of land where it comes from. So what you collect, you of course look at the country of production. So that also means that if parts of the product come from different countries or regions, each must be identified. You also look at the geolocation of all production plots, which are the exact geographic coordinates, which I'll briefly touch upon in the next slide. But basically, these are called GeoJSON files or polygons, and they work with the latitude and longitude. So this is kind of the information that you'll generally need. And then also, of course, you need the date/time of production, being the date or date range when the commodity was harvested or produced on those plots. So how do you get it? The producers provide GPS coordinates or GeoJSON files. If you look at the top right of the screen, you'll basically see a very simple example of what that would look like. So here you have a map, and then in the red you see kind of a polygon of a highlighted section that shows what data or what map includes your harvest information. Also with the use of traceability systems or tools like Coolset, which offer built-in geolocation mapping tools that producers can use as well. So there's various options. And then who is responsible? On the one hand, you have the producer, which is responsible for providing the geolocation data. And here it's really important to understand that the producer is the one that actually produces the commodity that you're working with. So whether it be the palm oil producer, the timber producer, or another producer of one of the EUDR commodities, they are responsible for assuring, sorry, that that you get that geolocation data. And then internally, your procurement team will be responsible for allocating it. So let's have a look at mapping production sites. On the right-hand side, you see a screenshot of what it looks like within the Coolset module. So here we have kind of a polygon based on certain mapping data points, which are then these kind of latitude, longitude points. So first of all, the plot is defined as the land within a single real estate property where the commodity was grown or raised. Raised here referring to the cattle, which is also part of EUDR. You have two kind of options for an area or a map. You have the polygon, which is a plot which is over 4 hectares size, and this applies to all commodities except for cattle. And then you have a point, which is for a plot which is less than 4 hectares in size. And this is good to know because there are some minor differences in how you collect data. For cattle, traceability must cover all establishments from birth to slaughter, but here no polygons are needed, so you're not looking specifically at the kind of the area where they grazed. And then I have one more poll. So have your suppliers provided any geolocation data yet? 3 questions here again, which I'm really curious about. Let me publish it. So we receive precise location data for every batch. Only our more advanced / larger suppliers provide coordinates, others not yet. And then the third option, most suppliers are not yet giving us this information, or we don't know / need it. So I think predominantly we're seeing 80% right now saying most suppliers are not yet giving us this information, or we don't know / need it. So this is also what we're seeing is that the market is preparing this information. But as the EUDR kind of gathers momentum, we're seeing that a lot of companies are still focusing on changing the way they provide that data. And I think it's also kind of in line what we're seeing with other elements of sustainability regulations is, for example, with scope 3 information, now suddenly a lot of these suppliers are working with direct supplier data, whereas a couple of years ago, no one did that. So we're seeing that really now the incentive comes from regulation, but also from the market to start working with more data. Also now it's only at 67%, so we're seeing 25% saying only our more advanced / larger suppliers provide coordinates, others not yet. So there is already kind of a shift towards suppliers working with that data. Then I'm going to give the word to my colleague, Elisavet, who will tell you more about the other elements of data collection.
Thank you very much, Jasper. So now we're going to move on to some of the 2 most challenging parts of Article 9, which is collecting adequately conclusive and verifiable information for deforestation-free and legal materials. And this term is actually a very legal kind of term, so let's break it down a little bit before we see the actual data points. So under Article 9, you cannot just say that you self-declare that your materials are deforestation-free or legal, but you have to collect evidence that follow these 2 standards. The first one is adequately conclusive, meaning that the evidence that you will provide needs to be clear and creating a reliable conclusion. This means that you should rely only on objective facts and not use any assumptions or generic assurances. At the same time, the same document needs to be verifiable. This means that the evidence must be able to be independently checked by anyone who wants to cross-check it, like authorities, auditors, or any other third party. I find it very useful to ask myself the following 2 questions to understand if the information is indeed these 2 terms. First of all, I would ask myself, can someone reviewing a document reach exactly the same conclusion as me without needing to make any guesses? And secondly, can any person source the information back to its source without needing my help or my word for it? And if you can answer yes to both these questions, most probably you have adequately conclusive and verifiable information. But now that we know exactly what this means, let's move on to the practicalities of deforestation-free evidence. So deforestation-free means that the commodity is produced on a land that has not been deforested after December 2020, which is the cutoff date, but also for wood, we also have degradation as well. And in order to do so, some of the most reliable evidence is using satellite analysis outputs which can come from data like remote sensing. We're gonna get through it a little bit more in practice later, but also you can use geotagged photos, so which will just show you the current state of the plot at this moment. On the satellite analysis, you just get an overlapping of your plot along with specific deforestation data, so you can see if, based on the satellite information, there has been deforestation in this area. Lastly, there could be cases that there is deforestation there, but you can use land use history documents in order to prove that the deforestation happened before the cutoff date. In order to get this information, most of the times you need some remote sensing mechanism. And this could be either that you take the raw data for yourself, like from the Copernicus, the EU's Earth observation system, for example, and you overlap the plots by yourself and you try to make sense of it. But there are also service providers that specialize on analyzing this data and getting reliable outputs on if there is deforestation or not. As I said, you can also use some photos, and this is actually a much easier, let's say, example where you can just take a smartphone photo right now, which will be geotagged and time-stamped by itself. But if you want my opinion, I would prefer that you do both cases just to be, covered by all cases, like not just one of the two. Lastly, these documents you can usually find in land registry records or any other governmental organization. So now who is responsible for this? Of course, the producer is responsible to provide you the geolocation that Jasper just explained, but it is your responsibility to internally check and do the deforestation checks, unless the producer is also under EUDR obligated to do the same thing as you. Now, moving on, we also have the legality evidence, and EUDR frames legality in a very wide spectrum when it comes to EUDR. So not just farming licenses, but a whole set of local laws in the country of production. Now, we will go through some of the most important documents that you need to collect, which is, first of all, you need to have a land title. Not you, actually, you're a producer, but you need to also acquire this document yourself. A land title could be an ownership agreement, a leasing agreement, or any other document that applies to the different countries. But this is not alone enough to prove that you are able to harvest this area. You also need a harvesting permit or an authorization that says that the producer is allowed to actually harvest this area. Then, as a third point, you also need to make sure the producer is compliant with all local laws of the country of production. This could be laws like forest preservation, endangered species, protected areas, labor or child labor laws. And this is actually a bit of a tricky one because you don't always have a document that you can go back and check for it, but it could be a government report on labor conditions that you had a couple of years ago, or a certification that allows you, for example, to trade endangered species, and many other more. And lastly, EUDR highlights the topic of human rights and especially indigenous people's rights. So in case you're involved with them, you do need a free prior informed consent document that proves that you have taken into consideration the rights of indigenous communities. Now, most of these documents you can most probably get from the government or registry portals, but there are already some existing supplier platforms like Rainforest Alliance has one, where suppliers might already have some of this information uploaded. For the rest of the points, you might need to check some local consultants or some auditing companies, and at the same time, some certification scheme portals might give you some information. For example, FSC has this whole declaration on labor rights and child labor, so you could use this as an evidence as well. And lastly, the remote sensing we talked about before could also help you identify indigenous communities, which is usually included in the analysis that providers do. Again, as in the deforestation risk, we also here we see that the producer can provide some documents, but it is on you to cross-check compliance and make sure you set the requirements and cross-check if the documents are enough for you. Now, we said that we need to have adequately conclusive and verifiable documents. So let's see some practical examples of what is acceptable and what is not. So on the topic of land titles, on one hand, we can have a government issue land title document, while at the same time, we might have from another supplier a self-declared ownership letter. And we can see clearly that the first one, I can trace it back to a ministry of a specific country with a specific name of a supplier. And I can also go back and find where it was created, while on the other one is just an assumption from a supplier, and I cannot verify it with any local authority. Then, as a second example, we might have a supplier that is giving us the official document of a harvesting permit with a reference number, while another supplier might give us a scanned document that seems to be a permit, but it's missing pages and there is no reference number. In this case, even both are official documents. The second one compromises the adequately conclusive by missing the pages, but also it cannot be 100% verifiable if no reference number exists. Lastly, on the case of deforestation-free evidence, we might have from one supplier, we might have information like a whole satellite analysis report from open source data of the EU, while at the same time, another supplier may want to send us an aerial image with no dates, no coordinates or anything. And of course, the second one is not even able to be traced back to the actual plot. So of course, we wouldn't be able to accept this type of evidence. Now, as a last step, we said that the data collection is just a part of the due diligence, and we also have the risk assessment. And in order to do the risk assessment, sometimes we have to feed extra information that we collect from suppliers or other databases. But of course, this is part of our next session where we will have all the time to focus on the risk assessment elements. For now, I would like to spend some time on discussing how we can organize this collection process, because regardless of if you have collected, you have created all the capacity inside your company, if your suppliers do not want to give you the data, you will really be blocked and you will not be able to continue. The first thing we need to check is our internal processes. And one of the most important points in internal processes is the traceability methods. And this might sound very technical, but essentially it comes down to, are you able to distinguish which of your products have been created from a specific plot of land or not? And in supply chain discussions, and especially on EUDR, we have three methodologies that seem to be the most well discussed. So the first one is identity preserved. In this case, a company has made it so that its batch that comes from a single plot remains separate from the rest of the materials throughout the supply chain. Of course, this is the best method for EUDR because you have a one-to-one relationship between the raw materials and the final product. Then we have a second methodology, which is segregation, where the commodities from different either suppliers or farms or any other variable like shipment makes sense for you, are kept separate. So in that case, we don't have a one-to-one, but we have for a product a set at least of plots that might be relevant. And still this is acceptable for EUDR. Now we also have the mass balance case where sometimes inputs from different farms are mixed, but it could all be traceable to, let's say, to the fact that they are all compliant. But this could be a little bit risky because no mixing, there could be some sort of mixing with unknown origin products, and this is not allowed as per EUDR. However, we should mention that mass balance is one of the most frequently used systems. So now, before we move on to our next point, I would like to get your ideas on what traceability methodology you are using right now. And the possibilities are that maybe you're using each batch to be traced on a single farm. Maybe you segregate based on specific variables like suppliers, trucks, shipments, etc. Maybe you are mixing, but you're verifying the inputs, or you're not sure yet about what's the process, of course, if you are not involved directly. Yeah, and actually, as expected, I see that most of the people do not know yet this information, which is only logical considering that most of the people that do compliance in the company are not also involved with procurement and logistics and operation processes, but it's one of the first things you should go back and ask your colleagues, as otherwise you don't know if you're even able to trace your products to the farm. Thank you very much for your answers. So I'm going to move on to the next step, which is our external processes now. So we have set up our internal process, but what are we going to do about our suppliers per se? It would be very wise to introduce some pre-contractual screening of your suppliers. So check all the pool of your suppliers and their ability to meet EUDR obligations. Are they able to provide the documents we just discussed about? Are they willing to? And then as a second point, I would propose that you could add EUDR contract clauses. So in your contracts with your suppliers, you can already require legally that they provide you this Article 9 data per shipment, or also make them commit that they will help you if any data collection process is needed from them. As a third point, you should also consider streamlining the data exchange. This could be done with specific tools or templates, specific guidelines, because if you don't streamline your data exchange at all, you will most probably end up with a bunch of emails like scattered completely in your organization. And lastly, not all your suppliers will be EUDR ready. Most probably, most of them will not be. So you might need to facilitate some capacity building activities, which could be training your suppliers, providing them with specific tools, or collaborating to create a whole new process together. Now, we saw all the theory behind collecting data, but let's see how in real case example, we can overcome these challenges and create an EUDR compliant process for a company. I would like to introduce you a mock company, which is called Choco Wonders BV. This company is a chocolate manufacturer in the Netherlands, and they are sourcing from two countries, Ghana and Ivory Coast. They have a collaboration with one cooperative per country, and then they know that each cooperative collects products from 10 small farmers. So in total, they have, as producers, 20 farmers. Now on the right, we see how they score on specific EUDR requirements. So on the traceability to origin, Choco Wonders has a mass balance methodology. So they take all the products they get from these 20 farmers and they just mix them together in their yards. Then on the geolocation data, they have never received any GPS data, but they know also that the farmers have no tool in order to map this data at all. On the deforestation-free evidence, the Choco Wonders company has no tools by themselves to analyze deforestation, and also they don't know how to analyze the raw data they can get from the EU observation program. And lastly, on the land titles and permits, they talked with the cooperatives and they know that there might be some scattered incomplete documentation on farm level, but nothing consistent. Now, we're going to check how they can overcome each of these challenges. On the tracing to origin, Choco Wonders uses a mass methodology, we said. So they actually do not know from which farms the materials are coming from. They introduced two main changes in their processes that helps them switch this. The first one is that they asked their cooperatives to organize the shipments from completely scattered to the first half, for example, of the month, they receive from farms 1 to 5, and then the second half of the month, they receive from farms 6 to 10. And at the same time, internally, instead of mixing all together, they created a system where in their yard, they organize their shipments based on this setup that we just explained. This way, they achieved that from 1 to 20 that they had, they now have 1 to 5 mostly every time, which gives them much lower risk of anything, any issue going wrong. Then on the geolocation data, we said that the farmers have no capacity, especially no technology to even map the geolocations. So Choco Wonders collaborated with an industry association and they invested some money in order to buy one single laptop per farm in order for them to be able to complete these obligations for EUDR. And at the same time, we said that we don't have any tool right now to map the actual data as Jasper showed us before. So Choco Wonders chooses to onboard the specific EUDR solution like Coolset, where now each farm has a free account they can use through the laptops they bought them, and they can map all their origins, internal batches, and products. And this information will feed directly to Choco Wonders BV workspace. Now, on the legality in data collection, the small farmers have no consistent documentations for their farm. They're willing to get the information, but they also don't know which are this information or which are the right authorities to ask them. And then in order to overcome this, Choco Wonders and the cooperative created a guideline document that says which are the acceptable documents and where you should ask for each one of them. And at the same time, Choco Wonders, with the use of the platform they onboarded, like Coolset, they now can send customized data collection questionnaires to the farmers. So it's a no-brainer for them to go and fill this questionnaire with all the information needed. Last but not least, on the deforestation-free evidence, we said that Choco Wonders didn't have any way to cross-check these plots now that they have them available on if they are deforestation-free. With the use of the EUDR solution like Coolset, now they have a built-in origins analysis for deforestation, where in their own workspace they can see an overview of which of the origins are deforestation-free and which maybe should be flagged for deforestation. And this closes the cycle of going from completely scattered data to data collection and to deforestation-free and legality of the products of Choco Wonders BV. That's it from my side. So Jasper.
Thanks, Elisavet. Yeah, so that was it for kind of our sharing part of kind of the data collection side of EUDR for this first session. I've seen a lot of questions come in, really good questions. So we're going to try our best at answering them and making sure that you leave this webinar with all the knowledge that you wanted to collect. So let me just start with the first question here for Elisavet, a question from Livia. Is there an export requirement? For example, a large retailer which has more than 50 million in revenue in the EU sells a notepad to a client in Canada directly from the website. Do they have to do anything in the context of EUDR?
Yes, so it doesn't matter if you export or import, as long as you are the notepad is part of the HS codes of the EUDR list, then you do have to oblige to EUDR. Now, the thing is that if you are the exporter, most probably there has been someone that has already done the heavy work for you. So all the data we just explained most probably are collected from the forest company that harvested the logs that were used for this notepad, and this moves on to the supply chain until it goes to you, which usually goes in a form of a DDS, so a due diligence statement, which we're going to talk in our third webinar about. So in your case, you don't have to actually, like most probably, you don't have to collect all this data, but you just have to make sure you resubmit a statement that references the work of other companies.
And where can they find the HS codes?
Yes, so the HS codes are inside the regulation document. At the end, there is an annex 1, if I'm not mistaken, where you can read them. But if you open also our academy, we also have an article for it explaining all the HS codes and what they could include potentially.
Perfect. I hope that clarifies it. Should you have any questions about that, Livia, just feel free to send us a follow-up email. Basically, yeah, sorry, just let's move to the next slide. Yeah, here you also see our email addresses for any questions you may have. Question here from Joanna: is the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil certification method recognized by the EUDR regulation? So there are a number of kind of certifications that the EUDR recognizes. As far as I know, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil is not part of this, but as goes with most of these kind of certifications or like verifiable stamps, it is a way to already get close to the data you're collecting because, of course, some of this data overlaps. So while it's not a direct way to tell the EUDR regulators that, yes, you have this certification, so you don't have to include other things, it makes it easier to overlap this data collection process. Question here from Wanapa. Actually, I can put it on the screen so everyone can see. As an EU operator importing finished goods from non-EU suppliers, are we supposed to actually have permits and land titles of the harvester/farm where the raw materials come from, i.e., even the smallholders where our suppliers come from? I think Elisavet can answer this.
For sure. So I think for you to decide this, you need to cross-check if the finished goods HS code is in Annex 1. I can give some examples where they are and where they're not. For example, if you are creating handbags and you're importing the finished handbag like from outside of the EU, then this HS code is not included. So you're actually outside of EUDR spectrum. However, if you import the tides, for example, or if you import in another sector tires, ready-made tires out of rubber, then you still have to do EUDR. So it just comes down to, is your HS code included in this list? If yes, then yes, you have to find. And as we saw also in the example of the case study, you would have to find the information even from very small farms, regardless of their size. Is that this is like a cross standard for all EUDR materials.
Perfect. Then I have a question from Anton. I think also a question for you, Elisavet. Who will finally determine that documents are adequate or not, while almost all the documents are in the origin language?
That is a very good question. And in general, the idea of adequately conclusive and verifiable information is very like a topic of dispute. So essentially, you're making a decision on what you think the documents are adequately conclusive and verifiable, but you will get to test if your methodology is right only whenever you get an audit, for example. And essentially, again, this goes up to what is the person that is checking this and what they consider enough. So it's not that there will be a consistent list per country that you can cross check. So my advice is try to be on the conservative side. If you can collect more than one document, or be maybe a little bit more strict when it comes to what documents you collect. When it comes to the origin, there are ways that you can try to translate, or maybe you can refer to a consultant or a firm, for example, that could do this for you. But this doesn't make a lot of sense for one company to hire a whole legal firm just to cross-check one document that is in specific language. Of course, for example, if you use a solution like Coolset, we try to cover this as much as possible as we can by creating a database of what is accepted on each country, so we know what to expect. And then we are going to personally try to use also the use of AI in order to cross-check if what is being used as a primary information also checks out on the document itself. But this is just a safety net, and of course should not be used as your primary evidence, of course.
Thanks, Elisavet. So I have a question here. Also, we're getting towards the end of our webinar, so we won't get answer all the questions today. But as mentioned, we will go back to those questions over email to those that we haven't gotten to. So don't worry about that. I have a question here from Mia. When can we expect the European Commission's decision on the new classification of risk of countries by risk? So that's being discussed right now. We're not sure. There's no timeline on it yet. But it is good to know that should there be no kind of outcome yet by the 1st of January, you will start reporting with the existing framework, and it is up to the Commission to kind of make the adjustments. I do think that they're working hard to ensure that that happens before the 1st of January, to ensure that there's nothing unclear. But for now, this was first discussed or voted on last week, and now there's going to be a lot of changes. Also good to mention, so the next couple of days, we're speaking to members of the European Parliament, and we're going to ask them these questions as well. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn to see what the outcome of that is. Interesting question here from Nina. Is the materiality principle applied as part of the due diligence statement, as in the ESRS standards? Example, if we get 95% of a raw material covered by the EUDR from one source and 5% from another source, do we have to provide all information about each source, or will 5% be discarded as immaterial? So I'll give a quick attempt at this question, and maybe Elisavet can also add something to this. Essentially, you have to report on everything that falls under HS codes, and there's no minimum threshold, as is the case with ESRS, but also EU taxonomy, for example. You have to report on everything. So there's no limit on or minimum weight, for example, that you have to focus on. So yes, in this case, if you have one farmer that only supplies 5% of your raw material, then that also is part of your EUDR due diligence reporting. Anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it perfectly.
Let's see. I'm going to start filtering a little bit. Elisavet, I don't know if you've seen a question that you want to pick up. So we have yeah, maybe we have 2 more questions. Well, I see one question that has 3 upvotes. So let's give that priority as a very democratic process. What type of documents can be asked to suppliers for reliable information on a tree species?
Nice. So I think this depends on if this is created locally or not. So, for example, I know that if you are planning to import something or export something, you need as part of your customs documents a certificate of origin where information, even including the tree species, are there. However, right now, the tree species is part of the basic information that we talked at the beginning, which means that you just have to collect the species and then just report on it. So the part of adequately conclusive and verifiable information does not apply on the basic information. Of course, there are cases where I have seen that if there are disputes, they can even ask for sampling of the species where they send it to the lab and then they get the actual tree species back. But we should not assume that we should go that far, considering that this is not part of the adequately conclusive and verifiable information.
Perfect. And then the last question of today's webinar, one question from Marietta. If from multiple countries, for example, paper, is the percentage for each country sufficient?
So I actually am not sure I understand 100% the question. I think you mean if it is sufficient to know for which percentage. So actually what you need to do is you should give the exact number of like volume or kilograms of product that is created from its country of production. So I think the way you would go about this is that if you have paper, a batch of paper produced by 2 suppliers that provide you materials from 2 countries, you know if you use like 50% or 50%. So you know you have already the incoming kilograms of raw materials that came from each of these suppliers. And then you have to declare the information that you use for each of these batches. So essentially, practically, you do also the percentage, but you need the actual document as the actual number as well.
Perfect. Yeah, that wraps up the Q&A and also today's webinar. Once again, we'll have another webinar in 2 weeks and then another one in a month. You should all be registered for all 3 webinars as part of the EUDR Summer School. We also have here the QR code for our EUDR waitlist, as of course, we are also very, very busy working on our EUDR software, which will contain kind of all of the steps that we've mentioned above. So how to collect data, how to do a due diligence statement, the risk assessment, that's all part of our Coolset module. So should you be interested in that and want to hear more about it from our team, feel free to join the EUDR waitlist and we'll reach out when we have more information on when it's going live. We're expecting it to go live pretty soon. So yeah, stay tuned for that. For now, thank you very much for attending. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you know where to find us. My email address is jasper@coolset.com. And we also have the email address here, Elisavet@coolset.com. So any questions, feel free to reach out. And for now, have a very nice Wednesday. Bye-bye, everyone.